So I would like to tell you what this project is about. I'm going to share my screen and show you what this sonic encounters in, let's see, I'm going to play from the start. Here we go. For the Cambridge Festival, we had this idea to bring forward an event that would bring various of the different aspects that I'm preparing for a platform that is being prepared called Sonic Accompaniment to Birth in the Jewish Sahara. So this platform is an online platform that we received a Arts and Humanities Impact Fund from the University of Cambridge to build this platform using two very short interviews that I had done in 2016 and 2015 with Madame Sultana Azeroual in Casablanca. Here she was singing solo in her house, in her living room, singing, as you'll see, on the table, making percussion on the table, and also with a sinia, with a plate, and singing songs for birth, for marriage, for the tzaddikim, for the holy rabbis of Morocco, and songs also of call and response, which in the video she herself was actually doing with herself. So it was a little bit difficult to really recreate this full example. But Sultana was showing us actually this idea through these songs for birth about the sonic protection that we have. So we have, after the birth of a child in Morocco, of a Jewish child, we put these 4 different amulets on the sides of, the 4 sides of the mother's room wall. And for a week before the circumcision of the child, or even if it's a girl, there's no circumcision, right? These stand as a protection to the space where the mother and child are in. Well, the songs that the women sing during the mother's pregnancy and also after the delivery also act as this kind of sonic protection. So I was interested in exploring more these songs about women's sonic protection of other women. And I want you to hear a little bit of this interview.
ايوه هذا مازال عمرها مازال هي باكا ولدت مازال عمرها هكا ولا ولدت وليت قالت له وانا بعد مع وليدك سلمنا كل والصراب والكفيات والفراس والفراسات الحلال والسمعه قاديه في بيتي سنيه مرتها هيا هيدي ومالك يا لله امي ويا لله امي هيا لا كتر عجوبك يا ربي كنا.
So here we have this example of these songs that are sung during pregnancy and after the birth, and the conversation between them. And I'll be very short, obviously, because I want us to get on to the others, but we have also this idea of what happened to these musics during the time that the French came to the Maghreb. So Alexis Chotin was musicologist that came to Morocco and that started the conservatories in Morocco. And he actually collected some of these from the Muslim tradition. And so we have one here that says, pour favoriser l'accouchement, right? So as the woman is giving birth, we are singing to her, or the women are singing to her, to invoke the angels to come and help the birth, because of course, birth is a dangerous endeavor. even today, it can be a dangerous endeavor. However, one of the things that I found interesting is that Chotin kind of sets out the music with the kind of what I call a sonic colonial binary. So he splits Morocco into Bled el Mahsen and Bled el Siba, right? The land of the government and the land of disorder or of, and he splits the musics into these two different forms of sound. So one he finds to be more melodic and the other one is more rhythmic. One is more civilized and the other he calls more primitive. One he calls more refined and the other one he calls uncultured. One has time moving without distinction. The other one is connected to nature, periodicity, cycles, seasons, and days. So I think that this is interesting because we find that the materials from, or the songs that Jewish women and that women are singing in the Amazigh communities and in these communities in Tafilalet, which is this case, are of this round, circular, life cycle, rhythmic sort, but which I think was also had an element of threat. So because the Senia is also round, because the Bendir is also round, and because we have this idea of a sonic protection that is also round, I want to stay within the round and not within the lines of the colonial. So I'll finish with this short 20-second, and then we'll go to the next one. Great, thank you. So now I'm having a, here we go, click to exit. Yes, sorry about that. So now that you have this idea, that what we're trying to do is then to build this, a platform, an exhibit, using these elements of this interview from Sultana, and then explaining all these other elements that can spoke out from the history, the colonial history, the issues around language, women's sounds, women's singing, women's traditions, Judeo-Arabic connections, ritual connections, and speaking connections, etc. So the next person that I would like to invite to speak is Noemi, who was one of the inspirations for this platform, because she came to Cambridge and told me that she was looking for some of these songs. And I told her, actually, I've recorded some of them, and these are some of these traditions. She didn't even know that these existed, because she's actually putting together a film about her own experience with exile and motherhood as a young Moroccan Jewish woman living in California and away from the ancestral connection. So Noemi, I give it to you.
Hello, hi. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you for inviting me to speak. So my name is Noemi Hakim Safati, and I grew up in Moroccan Jewish culture through my father and his parents and siblings. And I will speak a little bit about my film. So my film is entitled Milk and Blood, and it's about motherhood and exile. And I'll just give you a small introduction, and then I'll show you a video that presents the film. So in becoming a mother, a lot of ancestral history is brought up and transmitted. And for me, what came up through motherhood was the experience of exile, which has left a deep mark, I think, on Moroccan Jews. And the film is inspired by reading the memoirs of my grandmother that she wrote on a kids' textbook. Approximately 2 decades after she left Morocco for France. And what transpires in her writing is a very deep sorrow and a nostalgia, but also a very deep desire and pride to transmit the knowledge of what was once a very vibrant community and culture. And not that it's not vibrant, but you know, in the lines that she writes about the life in the Mella, there's something that I would never have known about if I hadn't read her. And strangely, in her writing, she transmits a fullness, like a richness, but also a void, in the sense that in the case of traditions around birth, for example, she lets me know in reading her that there are traditions around birth to protect the mother and child, but she also lets me know that they are lost, you know, because she mentions them, but there's no keys, there's no access to them. And so for my film, I started researching. I was trying to understand what are the singing traditions, you know, and also in Chaim. Okay, his name is escaping me right now, but the book of 2,000 Years of Jewish Life in Morocco, there are mentions of women singing for birth, but very little is recorded. So I started researching the musical traditions of Jewish women in Morocco, and particularly around life cycle and birth. And what I discovered is that and that's something that I definitely learned through talking to Vanessa, is that what has been preserved is the men's traditions. And that even when women sing Moroccan Jewish music, is very often the music of men in the public space, in the public sphere. And so that's why the work that Vanessa is doing is really, you know, very groundbreaking and allowing us a chance to find a continuity. And so I'm not going to say much more. I'm going to show you a short documentary I made about my film. And yeah. Devenir mère, c'est un peu comme s'exiler. Il y a une exultation, quelque chose d'éblouissant dans la promesse d'une nouvelle vie. Et il y a aussi une perte incommensurable, une solitude, un chagrin immense. Peut-être est-ce la raison pour laquelle la douleur de l'exil est devenue de plus en plus forte quand je suis devenue mère. L'écho de l'expérience de ma grand-mère, qui a quitté le Maroc contre son gré. Il ne reste aujourd'hui presque aucun juif dans ce qui était autrefois la communauté vivante du Millat de Marrakech. Peut-être les genoux et les esprits, les fantômes qui peuplent notre cimetière. Le monde occidental nous semblait ouvert, sans limite, et nous sommes nombreux à avoir foncé tout droit vers cet après, que ce soit la France, Israël ou l'Amérique du Nord, toujours plus loin vers l'avenir et le progrès. Moi, j'ai poussé ce rêve d'occidentalisation à ses confins les plus lointains, la Californie, l'extrême Occident. Mon film, le projet Milk and Blood, raconte mon histoire, mon expérience de maternité et d'exil. Il s'agit d'une femme qui vient de devenir mère aux États-Unis où elle vit loin de sa famille. Hi.
Hi.
Ici en Californie, la maternité est une sorte de semi-maladie clinique et sociale où on se retrouve très vite marginalisé, isolé et souvent pathologisé.
Okay. And are you still feeling isolated? It's common for new moms. I understand. Are you having a hard time taking care of your baby?
Cette mère dans l'exil, elle a la conscience très forte d'avoir été dépouillée d'une tradition de femmes qui célèbrent le passage de la maternité, qui célèbrent la métamorphose que c'est de devenir mère. Elle est sans cesse renvoyée à un rêve dans lequel elle est entourée de femmes qui font un rituel de protection de la mère et de l'enfant. Ces traditions, j'en ai entendu parler par mes tantes, par ma grand-mère, mais je ne les ai pas vécues parce qu'on ne les pratique plus pour plein de raisons. Notamment qu'il y a, je pense, une certaine discrétion, une pudeur, voire même une honte de nos traditions qui a vraiment tout balayé quand on est arrivé en France. Et aussi tout simplement parce qu'on préserve moins les traditions de femmes que celles des hommes. Mais ces traditions, elles existent. Et c'est en rencontrant Vanessa Paloma-Elbaz et en découvrant le vaste travail de recherche qu'elle a fait sur les traditions musicales des femmes juives marocaines que j'ai découvert que, en fait, il y a des chansons de naissance qui sont spécifiquement pour le moment, par exemple, où la femme perd les os. Et en fait, il y a des chansons qui accompagnent tout le processus de la naissance jusqu'à après la naissance, où on continue à faire des rituels magiques qui protègent la mère et l'enfant. Donc c'est grâce au travail de Vanessa que je vais aussi pouvoir filmer ces femmes qui chantent les chansons de naissance et mettre en scène, mettre en vie, à partir de ce travail documentaire, le rituel qui sera la pièce centrale de mes Blood, chanté par des femmes, des chanteuses, des musiciennes. Le rituel à travers lequel la mère du film trouvera un chemin de sortie de l'exil. Voilà. J'ai rien à ajouter.
Thank you. It's so beautiful. It makes me cry every time. Thank you, Noemi. I would like to introduce now Professor Catherine Ellis, the head of the faculty board of the Faculty of Music of the University of Cambridge. And I am really thrilled for all the support that she has given this project, as she is the head PI for the project, for the impact project at the university. So that's really wonderful. And she works on French music. So the colonial past and present really come together beautifully. Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks very much, Vanessa, and thank you to all of you for being here. I have to say, feel a slight imposter because of actually my work stopping at Marseille and Nice and Perpignan, rather than actually crossing any of the borders, whether over mountains or over the Mediterranean. But the way that I thought I might be able to contribute something to this session was really with a video that gave a kind of very deep history of thinking about the colonial context and the modes of resistance that we as historians can see in some of the traditions that have been swept aside. And I was very, very struck in Noémie's film when she said all this was swept aside when we went to France. And I thought, yes, that is the connection that I'm trying to make. So I was trying in the video to think about what is at stake and to think about mainland France itself and the relationship between a very powerful Paris and provinces where people feel colonized as some kind of small-scale version of what happens in the wider colonial framework. And I was inspired by starting off by a quotation from way back in 1860 by Hippolyte Taine, who, as part of a kind of travelogue, wrote that the provinces of France were another France under the protectorate of Paris, which civilizes them and emancipates them from afar. And the message that comes through very strongly from that is that everybody else has to be brought up to the same level as Paris. And it feeds into a policy, post-French Revolutionary policy, and particularly a post-1870 policy of assimilation, that everybody within the French Empire, it is their job to become more French. And one of the ways that I wanted to illustrate that becoming French was to look at the world's fairs and to think about the ways that colonial and other exotic nations from the French bourgeois perspective were encouraged to present themselves. And they were encouraged to present themselves as a kind of work in progress towards civilization. And some of the commentaries that come from inevitably white males put these nationalities of Senegal, of Java, of other parts of Indochina, of mainland China, and of North Africa into a kind of pecking order. And it's very clear from the language that they use what that pecking order might be. But I wanted to start the video with a voice which I consider to be a kind of voice of resistance. And this is why I chose Brittany, because Brittany has always been the difficult province, in the most difficult province and the most separatist province of France, viewed as semi-barbaric, viewed as both a seat of Frenchness and also something that, because it's Celtic, is very other. And to take a woman's voice who is singing in a completely different, seemingly non-Western way of producing the sound, of decorating a folk song, seemed to me to be a way of thinking about what's happening in mainland France and the tensions between the mainstream, what's accepted, what's assimilated, and a voice singing in Breton, which is unassimilated, or where the tradition of folk music has been kept and nurtured and cultivated as a parallel stream, seemed to me to be quite important. And against that, I wanted to put a sonic version of the way that art music has tried to assimilate some of these resistant voices, and went back to Camille Saint-Saëns and an 1896 piano concerto, where in the space of a 7-minute part of a movement, he tries to get in as much of that World's Fair exoticism as he possibly can. And because he's working in Western notation, and because he is working with the piano and the Western orchestra, he flattens out so much of the kinds of sounds that he himself would have been hearing. He was in Cairo when he wrote it. He could have written something very different, but instead he comes up with a Southern Spanish evocation, a Chinese zither evocation with gongs and cymbals as well, and a Nile boating song, and manages to weave them all into something that sounds Western with these exotic tints. So I was trying to build up a sense of what it is to play in some ways with an internal exotic and an external exotic. And even the Bretons themselves play with this idea of being an internal exotic. And we have not only the folk streams of the woman with whom I started the video, but also the folkloric streams, which are a quasi-assimilated and domesticated version of folk culture. And so there are these three levels that I think we have. Something that seems much closer to some kind of folk authenticity, something which is rendered folkloric from the inside, and then something which is rendered folkloric from the outside, with the French state and the French mainstream tradition being that outside that imposes itself as the center and renders everybody else the other and the outside from its perspective. So I suppose my message is that it depends where you stand, where is the inside and where is the outside. And so much of this is about the relationships of power that you cultivate and the relationships of resistance that you might also cultivate. Thanks, I'll leave it there.
Thank you so very much, Catherine. So rich to shift the view from the other side. So we're really, and if you haven't seen her video, please go and watch it. I rewatched it this morning. You can really hear these elements. It's incredible. I would like to now invite Jonas Siboni, who is a lecturer of Judeo-Arabic languages at University of Strasbourg and also at the INALCO in Paris, to talk to us about this specific Moroccan Judeo-Arabic and potentially maybe the women's aspect of it. I keep on pushing him to look at the women's aspect of the Judeo-Arabic, and we'll see.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Vanessa and to the Cambridge Festival. Indeed, in the video that I recorded, I was focusing on the specificities of what is Judeo-Arabic inside of the Moroccan Arabic dialects. But today, I'll try to focus more on the specificities of women, exactly as you said. So just the first thing that I said is that basically Judeo-Arabic is a generic term in order to talk about the dialects of the Jewish community inside of Morocco, which is a minority speech, minority dialect. In terms of dialectology, the women's speech of Judeo-Arabic is a sociolect inside of the sociolect. That is to say, the speech of a social minority inside of a social minority. So we know minority speeches usually keep some ancient features of the language longer. This is how we explain some specificities, usually in Judeo-Arabic, like for example, the pronunciation of some consonants. This lisp, this zézément, as we say in French, sh is usually pronounced se, and je is usually pronounced ze. But actually, those are ancient features of North African Arabic, probably from Andalusi Arabic. For instance, other minorities have those features too. In the city of Fes, the ancient dialect of the Muslims that we call the dialect of Ahl Fes, they used to do that as well. I recently read a study on Muslim women's speech in the Medina of Rabat in the 90s. And it was actually very similar to Judeo-Arabic in terms of pronunciation. For Judeo-Arabic women's speech, we have mainly specificities of two kinds. The first one is due to that isolation. And we find what we call in linguistics retentions, like, as I just said, pronunciations, ancient lexical elements and stuff like that. Because they experience a double isolation, first as Jews and second as women. Jewish men have much more contact with Muslim men than Jewish women can have with Muslim women. Sometimes Jewish men's speech level their dialect to Muslim speech. For instance, in some Jewish families, we find men that do pronounce Arabic in a way that is between, that is halfway between the pronunciation of Jewish women and that of Muslim men. So that's the first thing. The second thing, still because of that double isolation, women groups show innovations too, of course, but they have much less access to education. And when I speak about that, of course, I mean in the traditional system until the late 30s, I would say. So they rarely know how to read and write Hebrew nor Arabic with Hebrew script. And because of that, they cannot proceed to what men do in terms of language. Men can correct, quotation marks, some pronunciations because they know how words are written. And they hear more the other dialects, the dialects of the Muslims. So they can identify as well more easily the Hebrew terms in use in Judeo-Arabic, what women can hardly do because they have very little access to many of men's privileges in terms of languages, of course, we see that. Women created a whole world of oral linguistic culture with many proverbs, many images, expressive sentences, blessings, curses, kid speech, and of course, poetry, mainly in traditional songs. So I'm just gonna give you a few sentences from the city of Fez and a short text from Meknes. The first sentence that I read from Fez is which means girls on the Mallah will bow down in front of you. So that's usually a sentence that a mother says to her son. The second one, which means I will be used as a ransom for you to be able to put on your phylacteries, the leather straps of Jewish cult. Another one, which is very famous, which means I will bear on my shoulders all of your pain. And it's connected to this other sentence. The second one means I will be your kapara. Kapara being the kippur atoning sacrifice. A last one, it's a sentence that a mother can say to her kid when the kid refuses to eat. And that means may your bowels disintegrate. So that one is funny. It's of course exaggerated, but that's what the sentence is for. To finish here, that presentation, I'm just gonna give you a short speech recorded by Joseph Streit from a woman from Meknes, so that you can hear a little bit of Jewish women's speech. Of course, I don't have the appropriate accent because I'm not a Jewish woman from Meknes from the late 50s. No, I don't need to share anything. Actually, I have the text in my computer, thank you. So it goes like that. نهار السبت في الصباح, which means Sunday morning. كيمسيو تفلا الرجال. Men used to go to tefillah. Tefillah is the Hebrew word for prayer. That means كيمسيو تفلا الرجال. Men go to synagogue. والوليدات and kids too. كيمسيو. كانت لنا عقلية ما مزياناش. We used to have a bad mentality. البنت ما تقرس. The daughters didn't study. عاد بدينا نمسيو, when we started to come, عاد بدينا نراو السفر, when we started to see the Torah scroll, سفر is a Hebrew word, وعجبنا الحال وكل شيء, and we enjoyed it and all. بالحق, actually, العقلية دي كنت لهم, the mentality that they did have, دي ولدية ودي قبل من ولدية, هي from our parents, my parents and before my parents, that was المرأة مدها مضطر. Women, her place is at home. حسيبة, to take care of home. السوق ما كاينش. They didn't have access to market. والخدمة ما كايناش, and they couldn't go to work. هذيك الخرزة فيها بزاف العلات. That thing is because of many reasons. إلا مست الصلاة, if she did go to synagogue, رازل عينهم على المرأة. Men would have their eyes in women. يحمر فيها. They would stare at them. هل عفون ذا. And here would come the sins. Avon is a Hebrew word as well. وهذه هي العقلية اللي كانت. That's the mentality we used to have. So in this text we can see some very ancient features of dialectal Arabic, many Hebrew words, I think 3 or 4 Hebrew words, but when women use Hebrew words, because they didn't have access to the Hebrew education, it means that it's evidence to understand that those words did really embedded the language of everyone. And what else? So that's a very interesting illustration. And of course, that very ancient argumentation that would say that it is women's fault if men can't restrain themselves, guilty by their mere presence. But I mean, what I mean here is that this short interview is very instructive, enlightening to understand the traditional situation of women in the Jewish millah, which was a minority inside of a minority. So I'll let it from here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jonas. Great to hear these sounds and these words, even though I don't agree with the mentality. It's just like very difficult for women. But I would also like to say that one of the things that you mentioned is very much like Sultana's son, that when we were doing the interview, he said, everything that comes out of her mouth is a blessing. So this power of the mouth in blessing is one of the features that I think is really important also in women's speech and in women's song. We will now go to Huda Ugadum, who is a member, one of the founding members of the Mimuna Association from Morocco, and it's a group that I have been thrilled to work with quite closely for many years. I think that Huda will talk a little bit more about what Mimuna does, and also about the rituals, shared Jewish and Muslim rituals from southern Morocco. Thank you, Huda, for being here.
Yes, pleasure. Thank you, Vanessa. So I'll first start by talking about Mimuna, because this is something that many people are not aware of. This is an organization that is currently an NGO, but we have started in 2007 as a student club. So we were a group of people in college, we're all Muslim students, who decided that it was extremely important for us as Moroccans to understand all the components of our Moroccan identity. That includes the Jewish one. And that is quite unheard of at the time, because most of the people in my age did not really know about Moroccan Jewish people. And myself included had not met a Jewish person until I was 21 years of age. So for us, it was something that we were facing the unknown. So we started as a club. And what we did is that we said, this is about understanding what is our heritage, and then making sure that other people know about it and continuing that preservation work, which eventually evolved into making it a living thing. So a lot of the events that we did were structured in a very specific way for a reason. Because we received a lot of resistance, we obviously, when you start such an activity, if you have any direct connection, it is seen as normal. For us, a lot of people struggled to see what the connection is, whereas for us, the connection is being Moroccan. So we decided that we would have different elements to how we approach educating the overall audience that we'd have. So we'd have one first element, which is academic. None of us obviously is in academia. We all have various jobs. At the time, we were all studying various degrees, but we would bring in people who know what they're talking about. We would bring in scholars, similar to what is happening here, but at a smaller scale, explaining different traditions, explaining marriage, explaining how the history of Judaism evolved in Morocco, and that would be the serious part of the event. Then we would have another component, which is food, where we would, for one day in the year, make the entire campus come and eat kosher food. So we would have the rabbi observe everything. Sometimes we would get things cooked in Fes, because our campus was an hour away. And then people would come in and start eating. And it had almost a magical effect, because as people started eating, they just say, yeah, what is Jewish about this? This is just a regular salad. And that was the starting conversation. Yes, it is just a regular salad, because it's Moroccan. And that's when you start coming into these commonalities. Then to end the events, we'd always have a musical component because music is very important for us. It's something that every Moroccan relates to. It's something that you have from birth to death, and in one form or another. And so you would have a typical setup would be a Moroccan Jewish singer with a whole team of Muslim music instrument players. And then you have a full auditorium of students who are 99% Muslim, who would be dancing for hours and just saying, this is just normal. Like, this is the song at my sister's wedding. This is the song that I have in the car when we are in Grand Taxi and things like that. And that started that conversation. For us, these commonalities and finding all of these traditions and all of these aspects is something that involves a certain element of discovery because we didn't grow up with this. And that's something that we carried on in every theme that we explored. Some of the themes were a bit more serious than others because we have organized the first conference on Holocaust in the Arab world, but others would be eye-opening, like this one, where you would assume that somebody would know about, let's say, birth traditions in Morocco. When Vanessa asked me to do this, I was quite surprised by how little I know. I had to ask around, and I realized that part of doing these events is also knowing about all of these traditions, because sometimes we just assume that they would be put into the psyche of people. But I was born in a clinic. I did not have any special songs made for me. And for me to go around and ask, so what are people doing? What did we do for my uncle? And things like that was quite eye-opening. Because I wanted to bring in the Southern Morocco Muslim perspective, which I'm very familiar with, I first looked at what is done in Jewish households in Morocco. So I looked at some of Vanessa's work, and I found some of the themes that the moment I read them, I thought, okay, so this is a very good starting point. First was the element of blood. I have seen that there is the head of a rooster that would be put in front of a child's room. There is also what we do with the byproduct of circumcision. There is a presence of salt. And there are a lot of other elements like having a sword being walked around a newborn's room. So if you take a lot of these elements and you think about it, where it comes from is essentially how precarious the situation of a newborn is and their mother. The thing is that these traditions have developed over a long period of time, and a lot of the need to go to that, let's say, otherworldly space, the sacred space, is knowing that you are so vulnerable at that moment, because women used to die during childbirth, and newborns used to have high mortality. Maybe a lot of this stuff is not needed right now, but knowing about it and knowing where it came from gives you an idea why we do certain things a certain way. So when you think that people are aware of their vulnerability around that time, right after giving birth, all of the rituals were geared towards that protection. So you will have an element of wanting to isolate the woman and her baby, wanting to protect them from the evil spirits. And evil spirits is what we call sometimes jnoun, which would be an entity. But we also have the evil eye, because in our culture, even looking at somebody with a look of admiration is really fraught. It's not seen as positive. If you look at somebody with a look of admiration, you have to say these kind of things. So the element of protection is very key. So what happened in households in the south? First, when the woman is starting to go into labor, she will only be surrounded by a small group of trusted women. Up until the 7th day of a newborn's life, this is a woman's world. So she will have al-qabla, which is the equivalent of right now a doula or a midwife. So she will have a qabla, who is a trustworthy woman, has a very important role in preserving all the tradition and also making sure that everything goes well. She will have these women attending to her needs. And then there will be a series of things that are being done to the newborn. These will happen over the first 7 days, because the newborn, up until the 7th day when they get their name, are considered as the same thing as the mother. They are one same entity. And that means that they are quite vulnerable to evil spirits. So they will be dressed the same way. They will have kohl on their eyes. And then you will have some elements that we have seen in the Jewish households, presence of the salt. the byproduct of giving birth. So essentially, the qabla will take the placenta and bury it in the ground, because blood and any other byproduct of birth is considered as being very open to being used in negative things, in some rituals that would bring in the evil spirits. So that will be buried. When it comes to what you use, you will have the use of henna, both for the mother and the baby. They are made to look exactly the same, so that when evil spirits come, they cannot tell them apart. And all of that will be, again, with just the women. So what happens after the 7th day, and you can see that there is also that element of 7 and also the number 40. What happens in the 7th day is that the baby finally gets a name, and this is called the Ceremony of La Creca. And here again, you will have two different aspects. Women will be doing a lot of songs, but men will be doing something that is more religious. So the only presence of men in the first days is when the baby is born. If it's a Muslim family, they will have the adhan, call to prayer, said in their ear by a male, typically the grandfather. Then they disappear. 7th day, the male part of society comes in, and that would be about reciting Quran, saying some things like amdah, which are incantations that are also religious. On the women's side, it's a bit less religious. There's a lot of dancing involved. So once you do this, you will again have in some families paying attention to the blood, paying attention to who's coming nearby, etc. Depending on the level of beliefs, you will have a lot of use of amulets. So this is also something that is used. Some people call it al-hirs, as a protection. So a lot of the themes that you will see are really about that protection. The last element that I saw that was quite common was actually when I read the sword thing in Jewish households. And actually in the South, you will use something, a piece of metal. It can be a knife, it can be a shard of a mirror or something, and it's meant to scare away the evil spirits. So that presence of sharp metal is also something that is quite common. And then you will have on the 40th day, the woman will actually go into a proper big ritual bath because all danger is over. So in short, this is essentially what I have observed, and I wanted to share some of these traditions. It was a discovery for me too, so that was quite eye-opening to see all the common themes of protection, salt, metal, birth byproduct, and also the segregation of the roles of women, having women doing the more intimate part and having men doing the more religious part. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Huda. This really broadens out our perspective of the women's interactions and the songs. And now we're going to move into the women singing in the public sphere. And we have Samuel Everett, Dr. Sami Everett from Crash at the University of Cambridge. He's an anthropologist, and he works on Jewish Muslim relations in the Maghreb and in France. And so he gave us a video on Marie Soussan in Algeria, and so we'll see what he has to share with us today.
Hello, everybody. Vanessa, thank you so much for organizing. I know that a lot of the labor that goes into this is very much something that's not recognized. And I'm aware that there's a gendered dynamic to that too. I'm aware of that because of the fact that I've organized events of this nature in the past, and often those that organize are not those that are recognized necessarily. So I really appreciate that, and obviously the Cambridge Festival and so on. It's interesting to speak after Huda, who is approaching the broad subject matter kind of intergenerationally across generations, and also is interacting with the question of exile from the perspective of a Moroccan who's in Casablanca, Rabat, wherever, after the perceived exile that Noémie was discussing. So the personage around which my video revolved was somebody called Marie Soussan. And I just wanted to speak around the kind of project of trying to reappropriate the memory of Marie Soussan. I think one thing to say, not so dissimilar maybe to the words of Professor Ellis, is that Marie Soussan is embedded in the Algiers landscape, which is obviously not Morocco, it's the capital of Algeria. And in many ways, anything relating to Jewish studies in Algeria has a very different kind of texture and flavor in the present to Morocco. And that's partly for political reasons. It's partly for the lack of a kind of academic source material, at least since the time of independence, so 61 and 62. So Marie Soussan was the first female stage star of a kind of nascent Algerian dramaturgy. So the beginnings of Algerian or autochthonous theatre, that which was performed in Derija in North African Arabic, and the Algiers variety, which is a very mixed dialect with lots of French in it, from the 1920s. So what's interesting, I think, about particularly interesting about the story of Marie Soussan is the fact that she's so not known in a sense, and she struggled within her life for recognition, and we're still struggling to recognize her today. So there's an interesting question, kind of an anachronistic question about her time and our time. And I think she struggled because many of the patriarchal structures in place, even within the supposedly open-minded cultural sphere that was dominated, and even within the indigenous cultural sphere, which was obviously very separate from the French cultural sphere. So there's a question of gender within that, but there's also a question of her memory in relation to Algerian historiography, and the fact of her Jewish familial background and its musical culture has always been a sticking point in that historiography. So there's also a kind of ethno-religious nationalist issue around the legacy or non-legacy of her memory. So this made me think with the very famous work of Gaitori Spivak, right, about how to make the subaltern speak, right? This essay, very impenetrable, very difficult text, but wonderful nonetheless, about Northern Indian, the Northern Indian context and the ways in which the subaltern, so the indigenous or autochthonous former colonial subject, how can they speak in the post-colonial era? I mean that temporally. She speaks about, or she writes about, writing back against empire. So that's implicit within the story of Marie Soussan, but also within the story of Marie Soussan, we have to ask the question, how to write back against empire, yes, but also against the indigenous culture from which she came, albeit as it's reformatted by contemporary Algerian historiography. And that made me think about the ways in which we conduct our studies and with whom we speak, and on what we base our research, and the fact that there's been a lot of discussion in area studies about citation culture. Who do we cite? Who doesn't get cited, right? And so I have a kind of long list of names, people who I feel have impacted in incredible ways on the way I've thought, but I don't ever cite because they're not academics. So people like in Morocco, Fanny Mergui, who worked with now famous anthropologist Joël Bahloul. People like my professor of Arabic literature, Mourad Yelles, so who's now retired. People like Saadaddin Ben Shereb, from whom I got the idea of how early Algerian theatrical culture was such a mix of different genres. People like Haj Miliani, with whom I wrote the essay, but who's based in Algiers, so gets less recognition than somebody at Cambridge. People like Nicole Serfati, and I could go on and on. So this question is one of sources. And I think it's interesting because trying to write the history of Marie Soussan, one is inevitably led to draw on two sources, one of which are the memoirs of Mahieddine Bashtarzi, who is perhaps Algeria's most famous dramaturgist, and the other is Alalou, who is perhaps one of Algeria's most famous theatrical thespians, theatre actors. And Alalou describes her brilliance and her as a diva, and Bashtarzi frankly describes her as a pain, right? And she is the only person that we could deal with because she was the only person that was prepared to go onto the stage. So we have two very contrasting perspectives and a very limited source material. So what do? Well, if we think about what Huda's been saying, what we need to go is in part to Algiers and to speak to people that know something about that memory, right? So there's an emerging collective in Algiers of young people who are interested in their Jewish past, right? And people like Wael Labati and the Yafil group, and they need recognition too. And then, of course, you know, as an ethnographer, I want to go to the family too, or what remains of Soussan's family, who are now in Marseille. And Jocelyne Tavares, her granddaughter, is perhaps the only mouthpiece through which Marie Soussan's story can be told today. And that's a question of oral history. So I think that this question of, I mean, we've all alluded to our source material and their different textures, and I think it's perhaps one of the fundamental things that we're speaking about. That's all.
Thank you, Sami, for that. And this is exactly the idea behind creating this kind of a platform with all these different voices. So this digital platform that we're creating on this material is, the idea is to have a pilot for other kinds of platforms that we can turn into larger, basing it on the sound archive that I built called Khoya, les archives sonores du Maroc juif, right? The Jewish Morocco Sound Archive, all these different elements so that we can have all these different voices and aspects in a flat hierarchy, as you so well said it, which is so important. I am now, thank you so much. And now I'm thrilled to introduce Honorable André Azoulay, the counselor to His Majesty the King of Morocco, Mohammed VI, who I am thrilled is present with us today to speak also about, he's recorded a video that premiered today. So if you haven't seen it yet, please go back and watch it afterwards. But also he's founded many festivals in Morocco, music festivals, and is a mover really on the international sphere of this groundswell of cultural, musical, and dialogue activities between Jews and Muslims through culture. So please, we're thrilled that you're here with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa, for having me this afternoon. And let me just add to what you said, that I'm not an academic, I'm not an expert, I'm not a professor or a researcher, I'm just a music lover. And I was a little provocateur when I decided to to find a way out to, so many challenges in my long travel. I called on music because, politics, usual politics, the economy, all what we know didn't work on those challenges. And I said, why not to try maybe something different and see what is going on. The first challenge was on my way to give a second chance of rebound and of renaissance to my hometown, Essaouira, which was the capital of Morocco in the 19th century, and then was confronted to a very deep, strong decline and disappeared of the agenda. And then when I was appointed by late King Hassan II as his advisor, I asked him to put on my roadmap how to give a second chance to Essaouira Mogador. He agreed, and I decided to move forward without asking anything to anyone to help. I decided to do it with what I have in hands, in fact. We who are belonging to Essaouira, we have a very, very brilliant, long, and exciting memory. And I decided to call on my memory as a Moroccan Jew and to make the houses, the buildings, the old buildings, the old stones of the city, telling us their history, what they have seen, what they have been part of, and to also address or to leverage the legacy, the heritage of the city, which was, have a very, very specific and singular history, because it was the only city on Islam. From Morocco to Indonesia, usually in the land of Islam, you don't have on the soil, on the Muslim soil, a non-Muslim majority. And Essaouira in the 19th century was the only city I know from Morocco to Indonesia, which means in the Muslim world, a non-Muslim majority, and in fact, a Jewish majority. And it lasts for close to a century. I said, why not? To try to know more about it and to see what comes out from it. So, with this kind of mixed legacy, heritage, culture, I decided to start by music. With a challenge which was not just an artistic or an academic challenge, but to try to address an issue which I shared in my childhood, which was the stigmatization, the ostracism, and in some way, the difficult treatment for the Gnawa. The Gnawa, it's part of the Moroccan society, which is Afro-Moroccan, and which is, largely the Black community in Morocco. And I was, aware that in the 70s, Essaouira was one of the major, let's say, escale, or major place for the hippie movement at that time. Well, you have Goa, you have Essaouira, and then at that time, the most famous jazzman or jazzwoman who joined the thousands of hippies staying in Essaouira, they already at that time recorded vinyl discs with the most famous Malami. I listened to some of those records and I was fascinated. I decided, why not to try to give a chance for my fellow Gnawi compatriots to retake over of their dignity, of respect, and to give them the place they deserve in the Moroccan society. And I will do it by music. I mean, in the country at that time, there were a lot, I mean, large skepticism saying this guy is absolutely mad to have a festival music with those people, those poor people, Ignaois, will be a major failure. So I decided to move forward anyway. And at the first edition of the festival, there were 30 or 40,000 people coming. It was a big wake-up call in the country. No one understood what is going on, what was going on. And then the second edition, more than 100,000. And it leads till 600,000, 700,000. The most powerful music festival in the African continent, in North Africa, and I mean, it creates such a deep, powerful, meaningful, cultural shock in the country that very quickly, and it never happens before, the whole chemistry regarding the place, the respect, the understanding of what means to be now in Morocco changed. I mean, just because of music, and just thanks to music, nothing else. It was not, I mean, no politician, no ideologue, no philosopher, no thinker was able to do it. And I was so impressed, so proud. Everything changed about the Gnawi's at that time. And now we are, I mean, we have 23 editions of this festival, and it's a new history book for them. But it started in a Sahara, but it started, and it was really so successful and so powerful, a real breakthrough, cultural breakthrough, political breakthrough, historical breakthrough, thanks to music. I said, why? I mean, how? It's magic. I mean, it gives me the chance to connect with something which looks impossible. I said, why not to try to, I mean, go forward and to make it bigger, larger, and to address other challenges with that. But before, I mean, coming to this point, I have to confess that it was so powerful, but also so risky. We decided, I mean, to have to try to manage how to have less people coming to the festival. It's paradoxal, but it was the case. Because, I mean, Essaouira, it's not a big city, less than, let's say, 60,000 people living in it, and having for 4, 5, 6 days this kind of event with 700 people or 600,000 people attending was a little risky. So I decided not, I mean, to avoid any damage and to try to keep this, I mean, experience as nice and as safe and meaningful as possible. And instead, I mean, in place of having 13 stages we have at the beginning, we decided to have just 5 or 6 and to stabilize the number of attendance to 200,000, 300,000 maximum. But then, my second choice to try to maybe keep the diversity of my legacy and heritage alive, because I mean, I remember traveling all around the world and saying I'm born in the Sahara. People were surprised. I mean, you are not Gnawi, You don't look black really. We know Essaouira because of the Gnawi. Vanessa helped me. Ça a fait disparaître tout le reste because c'était très puissant.
It was so strong, everything disappeared.
Yeah. So I decided to create a chamber music festival. Same skepticism around. People really, I have kept some articles of very distant persons saying, well, Maghreb in the south of Morocco will not work. How could you imagine that it could be successful? So I created the Printemps Musical des Alizés, south of Morocco, chamber music, opera, fascinating. We have now 17 editions, and it is one of the most sophisticated rendezvous for the chamber music south of the Mediterranean. And I'm so happy, so proud to have all along those 17 editions the chance to have young Moroccan musicians starting at the age of 8, 9, who are now famous musicians, performing in Berlin, performing in the Bastille Opera in Paris. And it makes also, true my dream that there is no bound, there is no frontier, no barrier, no religion, no ideology to music. Third, and sorry to be a little longer, Vanessa, but let me just mention the last one, which is one which is for me the most important and the most impressive one. It's Festival des Andalousies. In fact, I create 11 music festivals, but I will just stop with this one. Festival des Andalousies Atlantiques. And I made the choice, very, not risky, but very strange for those who were following what was going on in Essaouira. And to have the stages of this festival, dedicated exclusively to the musician, to the singers, to the dancers, Muslim and Jews, giving them a chance to retake over of what they were sharing, performing for such a long time in my long Moroccan memory. And in my what I knew about my family in Essaouira and my traditions in Essaouira. And it is fascinating again. What politics was not able to do, music again gave the right answer. Thousands of Muslim and Jews are now coming once a year to this rendezvous, just to enjoy, to be together, to sing together, to perform music together, to dance together, dialogue together, to listen to the others. And it's something which till now I'm so moved and so impressed and so grateful to music, because again it makes everything, even the impossible, possible. And so I just want to thank you for giving me the chance to join your platform, just to tell what was going on because of music on the ground. What, challenges and breakthrough on the most difficult, improbable challenges I was confronted to, and finally I have the chance to privilege to start to provide the answer, which was not really expected by so many. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, it's wonderful to have you here to give us this longer history of the festival aspect of music in Morocco, since Morocco music is such an integral part of daily life in the private and also in the public sphere. So here,
in the daily life, if I may say.
Yeah. So
you have millions of singers, you have millions of musicians, because as you know more than anyone else, Vanessa, in our daily life, people who are maybe your colleagues in the office, people working in the agriculture, in the port, fishermen, in the evening, they will be the best, I mean, talented singer or musician. And it's fascinating in Morocco. You don't need to be a professional. It's in every corner of your life.
Yes, yes. So thank you so much. What I would like to know right now, what we had hoped to do was to have a discussion amongst the panelists, if the different panelists have questions for each other. But I also know that we have, and time is running, so I know that we have Sultana's daughter with us. She should be here. Suzanne, est-ce que tu es là? Est-ce que tu es présente? Parce que là, je pense que peut-être tu es déjà connectée. I am not sure. She's on mute. Okay, so can Veronica, thank you. My languages are mixing. Could you please unmute Suzanne? Maybe I can, but I just can't find her if we're on here, because she was going to...
Est-ce que tu m'entends, Paloma?
Oui, là maintenant on t'attend.
Oui, parce qu'au fait, j'avais pas mis le son. J'avais pas mis le son.
Ok. Merci beaucoup d'être ici avec nous.
J'ai entendu, c'est très sympathique et je trouve que l'idée est géniale parce que le Maroc, il a tellement de choses magnifiques à développer que je trouve que ça vaut la peine. Parce qu'au moins pour nos enfants, nos petits-enfants, un jour, ils vont aimer. Pour le moment, peut-être pas, parce que on le vit. Mais après, dans quelques années, ils aimeront savoir tout ça. Moi, j'ai des grandes filles, elles me reprochent des fois, mais maman, pourquoi tu ne nous as pas appris ça? Maman, pourquoi tu ne nous as pas dit ça? C'est une très bonne initiative que vous avez prise, franchement.
Merci, merci. So she's saying basically, je traduis juste pour les non-francophones.
Okay.
She's saying basically that for the future generations, this sort of initiative is so important because that way, even material that hasn't been taught will be known. Alors, est-ce que tu peux nous raconter un tout petit peu sur l'expérience de tes parents, des chansons de ta mère?
Oui, eh ben, tu sais, ce qui est fantastique, Paloma, c'est qu'au Maroc, quand ils avaient envie de se rendre des comptes, quand une femme avait envie de dire à une autre femme quelque chose, ça ne se le disait pas en dispute, ça se le disait en musique. Ils attendaient une bar mitzvah, une fin de soirée pour s'asseoir et chacune elle disait à l'autre, voilà, ce qu'elle avait, le reproche qu'elle voulait lui faire, elle lui faisait en musique. Et c'était adouci finalement. Elle ne sortait pas fâchée. Elle se prenait après un verre ensemble. C'était sympa, je trouve. Et puis moi, ce que j'aimais, la vérité, c'est cette convivialité entre les vieilles, si tu veux, toutes générations confondues, puisqu'il y avait les vieilles, il y avait notre âge à nous, il y avait les enfants. Donc tout le monde était dans cette ambiance de musique finalement, de musique, qu'on le veuille ou pas. Et le Maroc, ce qu'il a de très, très beau, comme il a dit M. Amrazoué, c'est que à Essaouira, c'était un style, dans le Tapilalet, c'était un style, dans la zone espagnole, c'était un style. C'est-à-dire, c'était toutes les musiques confondues finalement. C'est juste magnifique.
So, je traduis.
Et les chansons, ce que je peux te dire, Paloma, les chansons, c'est que je vais les apprendre un peu pour pouvoir te les donner. J'en connais pas grand-chose. Je sais les écouter, je les comprends, mais je ne saurais pas te les reproduire.
Okay, je traduis là.
Vas-y, il n'y a pas de problème.
One of the amazing things is that when the women had, for example, music was such an important part, and when the women wanted to when they were having a fight with somebody, actually they would have the fight through song. So they would actually have like this back and forth, retorting back and forth, not necessarily in a confrontational way, but it would soften the edges. And it would happen after a bar mitzvah, at the end of a party. At the end, they would sit down and then they would sing this together, and then everybody would laugh a little bit. They'd have a glass of wine or something afterwards, or mahia, and then everything would pass. So this is, and the other thing that she mentioned was the specificity of the music in the different cities, how in each city actually there are different sounds and different musics. So and she promises us that she will learn her mother's songs very well to be able to sing them to us next time. À la prochaine fois, si Dieu veut.
Très sympathique.
Merci beaucoup d'être avec nous aujourd'hui.
Alors, à l'occasion, je t'envoie des musiques sympathiques que tu peux mettre dans ton petit film, il n'y a pas de problème. En tous les cas, c'était très sympa.
Merci.
Et bravo à tout le monde.
Tu sais, Suzanne, on attend les vidéos de ton...
Oh, pareil, une bonne casserole avec un fond épais et surtout une couvercle qui est parfaitement à la bonne taille. Voilà, donc ce qui est le cas.
On attend la vidéo de ton aîné.
Ah, d'accord, très bien.
Ça sera super avec tous les chants.
Oui, je t'enverrai. Ce qui est rigolo, c'est que ma fille, moi, ma fille et mes 3 filles, on a eu à peu près les mêmes photos et les mêmes chansons. C'est fantastique. À 50 ans, à 60 ans près, presque. C'est juste magnifique. Et c'est une très bonne idée parce que je pense que si on ne le reprend pas maintenant par des gens comme toi, ça peut se perdre. Ça peut se perdre, je pense.
Oui,
j'ai vu nos mariages un peu mixtes, les Ashkénazes, les Marocains, qui va faire, qui va pas faire. Autant qu'on essaie de conserver, je crois.
Merci.
En tous les cas.
Merci beaucoup, voilà. Et Chag Sameach. Merci.
Chag Sameach à tout le monde. Un plaisir, franchement. Bye.
So Suzanne has said that her own henna party and her daughters, 50 to 60 years apart, basically have the same photographs, the same dress, the same songs. And so part of what we want to do on this platform is to show these kinds of things, to put them side by side, to have them available to the next generations and hopefully in the long term. So last thing that I want to do is, one of the things that we've done for the platform also is we did a workshop with young composers and asked them to listen to the songs of Sultana Zedoual and to compose something inspired by her sounds, her song. And one person sent me, so these will be up on the platform, but I have today one of the recordings of one, let me see if, here we go, of one of the composers. Her name is Taya Mashir, and she actually studies Gnawa culture in Essaouira. She studied with Ma'alem Sedik Larch, who's one of the few remaining Ma'alems who knows the Septi'in, the secret Jewish Gnawa repertoire. She's been working with him over the past few years. And so she was listening to this question that I asked to please create something based on this material to respond to Sultana's songs. And she said that she heard clearly the lyrics of creation and began to compose a score on the gimbri to match the heartbeat rhythms of her earlier composition on creation. But the gimbri only wanted to play the songs of the Tagnawit, the rhythms passed and honed for many generations. And in particular, her gimbri wanted to play sweetie melodies. So she listened. So she kept on strumming the Samawi, the version of Malim Mahmoud Guinia. And before she knew it, the first words of Torah found themselves rolling off her lips and over this hypnotic gimbri groove of Samawi. So she wants to present this today to us. We'll hear a short version of it. And she's here present with us also from California. So I'm thrilled to have us here. And she calls it a weaving of these different traditions. So here we'll listen to a piece of this.
בראשית ברא ברא אלוהים, בראשית ברא ברא אלוהים, את השמיים ואת הארץ, את השמיים ואת הארץ. She began to contract her womb. She began to contract her womb. The whole world was born, emerging from it seemed soon. The whole world was born, emerging from it seemed soon. והארץ טובה בו, והארץ טובה בו, וחושך על פני תהום, וחושך על פני תהום. From this great deep mystery, from this great deep we came to be. All of the stars, all of the sea, all of the earth inside of you and me. בראשית ברא ברא אלוהים, בראשית ברא ברא אלוהים, את השמיים ואת הארץ, את השמיים ואת הארץ. She began to contract her womb.
I don't know how to turn it off, so I'm going to mute myself, and I would like the Q&A to start, but I'm thrilled that we're ending on this. So please, if the Q&A can start, and thank you, Taya, for this composition. Here we go.
My great pleasure, and the song often won't stop for me either.
Okay, Taya, do you wanna share a little bit about the creative process, how you did that?
I would love to. Yes. As Vanessa said, when I heard Lala Sultana's music, I heard this composition creation that I had made many years ago with a heartbeat drum, and often I've received many messages, and probably the past 8 years since its release, from birthing women who've listened to that track on my album, while giving birth in the hospital and birthing centers at home. And it's one of the most moving things to me as a chant recording artist to know that my music makes its way to those life cycle moments. And when I heard Lala Sultana's song, I just was like, oh my goodness, this, please. And the Sibtine, the Jewish Ganawa repertoire, are quite secret. Not a lot of people speak of them, but my teachers have been encouraging me not only to archive the Sibtine, the traditional songs of the Jewish Ganawa songs, but also they've been encouraging me to put Hebrew lyrics to Tagnawit, to Ganawa music. And this felt like an amazing invitation to begin composing. And I thought, as Nessa said, that I would kind of make a new score on the Gimbri, but my hands and my Gimbri just don't let me play anything except Tagnawit. And so I was playing one of my favorite songs by Ma'ala Mahmoud Guinea. And it just felt like such a blessing to weave that. And the whole time that I was composing and playing, I was seeing the Swiri seas, just the waves on the rocks, and feeling the call to creation again and again and anew.
Thank you so much. And it's wonderful to have this on today at this event as part of the launch, the pre-launch to the platform, and this new creativity that can come from these older songs that are mixed in what you so beautifully call the weaving. So thank you so much. I'd like to know if there are any other questions from the panelists or from the general audience. Okay, Huda has a question.
Yes, so this is more of a semi-technical question that I wanted to put out there for the program, because from my experience being a Muslim promoting Moroccan Jewish heritage, there is always that concept of other. What business do you have in being in that? And so I have seen here in a lot of the exchanges that element of nostalgia and links. We have some Ashkenazi who have commented and sent me comments that they're very excited. I was thinking with Hoya, I understand the technical setup for it, but I was wondering, what are your thoughts on making sure that the audiences are not only people who think that there is only one legitimate model for you to be interested and involved? How do we make sure that other people from other countries or who would have a different overlap? For example, my overlap is being Moroccan. Some person's overlap might be being Jewish. Another person might be because they traveled to the country. How do we make sure that we get these all different types of groups who would have that interest in? Because it might be for now that there is a very clear path towards this amazing resource. How do we open it up to other people who would be tangentially also really keen on having access to that? I want to sing Swakbira, I want to hear what is being sung and all these things, even if I will probably not do it in my own wedding, but these kind of things.
Yes, thank you so much for that question. It's so important because the whole idea is to create a platform that is available for what we call in French, right, le grand public, for everybody, open, but also that is detailed enough so that scholars can actually access, and that has enough specificity so that people that are from that region or from that descendants or that know the languages very intimately can find something to hook in. So this is why actually in the recordings and in the gatherings of materials, I've cast a really wide net, and I'm basically interested in almost everything. And now, because of the digital sphere, we can actually hold so much more in archives, right? The issue is the searchability issue then becomes really the technical aspect of how does it become searchable? But then also this other question that you've asked, which is so important, is how do we make sure that it gets out to people, that people will know about it? And this, I think this is a slow process on the one hand, but it can also be very quick according to the kind of institutional and grassroots involvement in the process, because sometimes it just takes one person that's like a kind of a gatekeeper for a certain community to tell their community about it, and then all of a sudden people will know about it. Also, I think the press can play a part in it. I think that that there will be, I mean, social media, and the idea is to have uploadable aspect, so that people, if they have in their own family, they see something and they say, oh wow, yes, of course, I have a recording from my son's, you know, tahdeed ceremony when we did this, and I'm gonna, maybe we can put it up on the platform. So these are the kinds of things that we want to start to create a dynamic, because once we have a place for this dynamic to exist, then we can start to interact, and it can start to grow, and we can really create something with longevity, which is what I'm most interested in. Thank you, Huda. I don't know if we have any other questions. Maybe we have some questions also in the chat that I haven't been able to follow. So if somebody has some of those, that would be great.
There's a raised hand, Vanessa, from Amira Mishrahi.
Great, thank you. Amira, please, can you unmute yourself?
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, great. So the question that I have is like, basically like it's for the group, although I hope like specifically that the Moroccan women will be the ones who climb up to answer it. But like, I'm just watching this and having like so much emotion coming up to me as like a descendant of exiled Jewish people from Morocco. On one half, my other half is Palestinian, but that's for another time. Like, I see like so much effort to make the in the efforts to preserve the culture of Moroccan Jewish women. Like, how can we make justice for the wound of our loss of culture and our exile by like making sure not only that these rituals and songs and memories get preserved for like the broader history and academia, or for like people that are interested, but also for like us, the descendants of the exiles, so that we get to heal the wound and reconnect with our ancestors and rebuild our culture. And I guess I would just like to hear, especially from the Moroccan women, like, how do you think we can do that? Yeah. And thank you for all of those who spoke. Thank you.
Noémie, c'est à toi. You have to unmute yourself.
Oui, ben, oh, sorry, I speak in English. Yeah, I think actually the fact that I'm the one to answer is maybe part of the response, is that having a lot of us will be, you know, being centered in the project will probably be helpful. And yeah, I think it's for me, like, I feel like I have a lot to learn from Suzanne, and I want to really, you know, place my attention on those experiences. And also, yeah, so I think it has a lot to do with centering those voices. And I'm really curious also what, if Huda has an idea on that.
Yes, so actually part of we had something similar, a parallel experience to that, of needing to heal something, because in my generation there was almost a sense of shame once you learned about we are post-exile, right? So we only have very, very small community, but the problem is that people of my age and yours, we only grew up watching politicized comments on Judaism. So for us, we did not know what Moroccan Judaism is. And so we also had that whole part of shame and hurt and sometimes anger, whether right or not, that we needed to also help heal. And part of the work, why I think Hoya is really amazing, is that you can have discussions, but you need to have the raw material for it. You need something to start with. And having organized many events, it's a completely different conversation when you just start going in and having people just talking at each other, screaming at each other, versus when you have, here are some documents, here is a testimonial, here is a video of this person, etc., etc. So I think where this program and this concept comes into place is giving that raw material where whichever format of release, essentially, that you need to make, you have the starting point. So you're not going in the dark, you're not going in alone. Whether you choose to do it as focus groups, you have material to bring in a starting point. Sometimes just having a song to listen to and say, okay, so what does that make? What feelings does this move in you? And not having feelings is also part of the discussion itself. So I think there is no one specific way. Some people will need to have focus groups. Some people will need to be more active. Some people will just need to go with alone. But whichever format works for you or you decide to use, I think having raw material always helps. You don't know you need it until you see it. I wouldn't have been able to have a discussion about, for example, why is this building this way? Or why is it that there are certain things we don't talk about if I hadn't had at least something to point at. And the idea is that it's not just about nostalgia. This platform should not be something where we look at and we say, oh, yasra, and it's not nostalgia. It's really about taking that and saying, yes, it was, and it still is. How it is up to you, how to make it live for you.
Yeah, and it's also, it is alive, and there's, as Catherine is saying in the chat, there's a lot that's alive, and I think keeping it alive is what we do.
Yes, yeah, thank you, Amita, for that question. I see also there's some questions in the chat that I'd like to tend to. There's one from Catherine Michaela Niculescu that says, how far has this tradition of women singing been retained and or evolved in the present day Jewish community within Morocco from the post-colonial period until the present day? I will answer that. It's actually alive only in the older generation, really, mostly. The generation, I would say, that is in their 50s knows pieces of the songs. They know like imprints and maybe phrases, but they most often don't know the whole song anymore. Their children have the memory of the song being sung, the memory of the moments of the song, and of it being important, but they don't know the song anymore. So what I think is so interesting to do is to, because then what happens afterwards, for example, with Noemi, is that then there's a generation that comes that says, I've heard about these songs. I want to know the song. So, and since it's an oral tradition, this is the catch-22. We don't want to write it down, right? Because then, as Professor Ellis said, it flattens it. It loses all the microtones, the inflections, the language, but now today, fortunately, we have recordings and we have this digital technology that we can actually preserve it and learn from it and have a new form of oral transmission that maybe jumps a couple of generations. So this is this idea of recreating oral transmission, maybe. We have, this is another, we have the feeling as well as some evidence that Moroccan Megodashim are less attracted to quasi-magical ritual in general. This is not a correct reading. I would say, I don't like to use the word magical either, because it's actually seems to me like it's kind of looking at it from another perspective that isn't the internal perspective, actually the separation between sacred and secular does not exist. And so everything is part of the paradigm of a full life that is impacted by the energies around it. And so any kind of word, if you say a negative word, that actually has physical impact. If you do a positive action, that also has positive impact. That's not necessarily magical, because it's a mystical way of interacting with life. And it's actually in Sufism, it's in Moroccan Kabbalah. It's the basis of Moroccan Kabbalah as well. So and the Sephardim are very much, also the Megorashim are very much, which are the Jews from the exile from Spain, are very much part of that lived Jewish mystical way of living. So I also see that Amidas has her hand up, so maybe you can.
Yes, I wanted to bring up Gulmima, and that once a year on Ashura, some of the Imazaren, the ostensibly Muslims, the Muslim population, on that one day of the year, one night of the year, are Jewish again, remembering when their ancestors were Jewish, and they sing Jewish prayers and are very attached to these prayers. And I don't know who's studying this or recording it, but I'm wondering to what extent women's music, women's song, Jewish women's songs and prayers are included in this ritual that occurs each year on Ashura. I don't know if you've looked into that.
Yeah, I haven't.
Or if Huda has.
But you know,
a really wonderful way of preserving the music.
There's a researcher at the University of Berkeley, Sarah Frances Levin, who did a PhD on the Jewish songs that the Muslim women in the Atlas Mountains sing, and how they actually remember their Jewish neighbors through these songs. So she's actually done a whole a PhD on this recently in I think 2017. So it's a pretty recent research. Let's see if we have some more questions. If somebody else sees one of the questions in the chat, please read it. So one of the things, actually, we're coming to the close of our 2 hours. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to all the speakers for your very interesting and multifaceted aspects to this conversation. Since what we're doing is building towards this platform, if anybody has any suggestions, ideas, and I like also when people come up with things that seem, like we say in Spanish, descabellado, like it seems crazy, like it seems totally far out. Sometimes those are actually really amazing. So anything that you would like to send our way, please do, because it would be really interesting to have so that we can do what Huda is saying. How do we really reach, and that this become a resource that really is helpful for people. And if you want to be a part of the focus group also for when we start to build it, so that we can send it out and get feedback, then please register either in the private chat with Eric or through the email address. We are thrilled to have had you all with us. We're thrilled to have been a part of Cambridge Festival. Thank you, every single one of the artists and the audience members and the panelists. And I have an excuse from Monsieur Azoulay, he said he was sorry he had to leave at 2:30. So we see his empty chair there. He's I'm sure we'll send him the end of the recording. He'll be very glad to hear our discussions. But very exciting to be able to be here all together with all of you, and to what will come, that I hope will be something very creative and inspiring and useful, but also something that will impulse a new kind of relationship to these very profound aspects of women's vocal participation in the private sphere, and maybe in the public sphere a little bit more. I don't know if anybody wants to also say one final word. Does anybody have something they would like to close?
Thank you to you, Vanessa, for running such a fantastic event. I think it's been really, really enjoyable. And as I said in the chat, I'm really excited to see how the online exhibition develops in the future. So thanks ever so much to all the organizers and the speakers.
Thank you so much.
Yes, no, looking forward to Noémie's film. So thank you for coming. For those of you that are celebrating Passover, happy Passover, Chag Sameach, Moadim Lesimcha, por muchos años. For those of you that will celebrate Easter, happy Easter. And I thought that this conjunction of Holy Week and Passover was quite interesting in our convivencia, our lived convivencia online. So thank you all for being here, and have a wonderful day, and check out the rest of the programs of the festival. Thank you so much.
Thank you.